in the three stories of Catch-22, A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, and For Esme with Love and Squalor, the setting is placed during a high-stress time where American soldiers were thrown onto the front lines and constantly under the stress of murdering people and the threat of being murdered themselves, more specifically known as World War II. Though the settings of each differ slightly, they all share the same qualities of tensions caused from the war, which possibly illustrate the psychological impairments of the protagonist of each story. Yossarian of Catch-22 is placed in a time of infinite missions under a tyrannical leader, Colonel Cathcart. These missions put Yossarian under the immense psychological strain with the previous conflict from Snowden's death, along with the use of the ambiguous Catch-22. Psychological strain is also presented upon Seymour Glass from A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, where he had fought on the beaches of Normandy and is conflicted with his inability to adapt to the changes from the impact of the war on himself.
During the D-Day invasion, it is easily suggested that the psychological impact would be great based on the idea that it was a high-risk mission with a high fatality chance from the German machine guns. By surviving this event, the guilt of murdering people turned Seymour into the person he is during the story. In For Esme with Love and Squalor, the narrator is converted into an emotional mess, where he questions why he is needed to continue on, even though the war has ended. Essentially, because of the high tensions of the war, the idea of the romanticization of war and advancement through children, efficient eyes and inefficient mouths, and a personal isolation are apparent in the three stories.
In these three literary works, war is often romanticized to seem more virtuous than it really is. Beyond these often obvious themes, there may be more subtle underlying themes regarding how war dehumanizes soldiers, making them followers of a corrupt power, or adversely affecting their emotional state. The romanticization of war is significant in these three literary works because it not only reveals the corruptions of war, but it often plays a major role in the emotional development of the protagonist throughout the story.
In Catch-22, the corrupt American system that handles the war creates a significant absurdity throughout the story. The majority of both soldiers and administrators that make up the American base at Pianosa, Italy, seek personal gain through the suffering of others. This prevalent mindset leads to the degradation of the war effort and the destruction of morality. Certain characters seem to be responsible for not seeing the toils of war. Cathcart's main goal throughout the book seems to be revolving around his desire for a more prestigious rank and to get his story in the newspaper. To achieve these goals, he is willing to blindly increase the number of required flights without concern for the state of his weary men. Shishkov is also guilty of focusing on the superficial aspects of war, as his personal interest is the promotion of his own parades. He, too, has little concern for his men that want to relax when not risking their lives for Cathcart.
In A Perfect Day for Banana Fish and For Esme with Love and Squalor, there is very little direct action involving the battlefront, but the romanticization of war is implied through the actions of others. Sybil, Muriel, and her mother focus not on the hardships the war has brought on distraught soldiers like Seymour, but only on how he should act. Even Seymour's own allegory implies that he wanted to go to war at first, but has long since realized that war is not all about heroism and glory. The banana fish realizes too late that eating too many bananas can kill him in the end. And For Esme with Love and Squalor, the romanticization of war is very subtly implied by the phony intelligence programs and Red Cross recreation rooms. The effects of this superficiality, however, on the narrator emphasizes the destructive nature of the glorified mask over war. Clay is an example of an atypical and often glorified result of destruction that embodies what others expect men to be after war.
These three literary works feature a majority of the characters that put war on a pedestal and encourage overestimation of the glory that war might bring.
Isolation seems to be another connecting factor among the protagonists in these three literary works because they are often very influential in the development of the characters. Lonesomeness is often brought on by a distant personality caused by conflicting beliefs or actions. In all three stories, isolation leads to growth.
In Catch-22, Yossarian felt distant from his fellow soldiers after the police officer incident at Rome. He also feels distanced from newcomers because of their high expectations of the battlefield, and he feels distant from the prostitutes because he realizes the corruption they represent. Major is isolated from his soldiers after they learn of his promotion. He spends his time in the forest like the chaplain and Captain Flume. Isolation rules these characters' lives, but helps them find an answer to their woes. For example, Eucerion, through his lost wanderings through the streets of Rome, realizes what he must do to rid himself of atrocities he has helped commit. The chaplain eventually learns to find his self-confidence in the forest, in the hospital, with the help of Eucerion. Even the chaplain, the most introverted character in the book, finds his true purpose through his own isolation. Isolation acts as a medium through which characters are able to voice their own opinions about war.
In A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, isolation proves to be the ultimate enemy of Seymour Glass. Instead of overcoming his internal sorrow, Glass fully succumbs to it. As a result of his conscious decision to distance himself from Muriel, he himself paves his own road to self-destruction. Glass is severely isolated from society because he is not able to adapt to post-war. This isolation stays permanent as even the innocent Sybil is unable to rescue him from his depression. Sybil is also lonesome. She has no friends and no real love from her mother. The inability for Glass to overcome his own pain leads to even more isolation for Muriel, who has now lost her husband due to a mysterious cause. This story demonstrates that the power of isolation is determined by the disposition of an individual. A more optimistic person such as Eucerion can use it to his advantage, while a hopeless person such as Seymour Glass is overcome by it and the war.
The isolation of the narrator in For Esme with Love and Squalor is shown by his quiet letter writing and his choice of entering the quiet coffee shop instead of the crowded recreation area. He seems to prefer quiet company than loud congregations. In this instance, Esme sees his loneliness and is tempted to go and speak to him. The narrator's isolation helps him attract Esme's attention, which later changes his life for the better. In this case, it was this attraction that rescued the protagonist, not his own disposition or willingness to act. In this story, Esme is also lonely. She must be both the mother and the father of herself and her little brother. Yet this anomalous character is able to help others overcome their pain with some innocent charm and a timeless memento, a broken watch, that she gives to the narrator.
In these three works, it is clear that isolation can either help or hurt the protagonist, depending on the situation. War invokes a kind of isolation that seems to be more severe and causes a deeper wound that takes care and understanding to heal. The lack of such compassion may worsen the emotional state and ultimately lead to his demise.
The ideas of efficient eyes and inefficient mouths were first introduced in Catch-22, but this theme can be adapted to fit certain characters in all of the three literary works. Characters with efficient eyes are often overburdened by realizations of deception, and these characters can often see past superficialities that characters with inefficient eyes are lured into.
Characters with efficient mouths seem to be better communicators and usually get what they want since they are more outspoken, unlike characters with inefficient mouths who cannot effectively voice their own, often more rational ideas. As a result, they are usually hurting and depressed.
Generally, the majority of the characters in a given work have inefficient eyes and efficient mouths, which implies that these characters are foolish and short-sighted, whereas the few characters with efficient eyes and inefficient mouths are wiser but less outspoken and depressed.
In Catch-22, characters like Cathcart and Milo seem to have inefficient eyes but efficient mouths. Cathcart does not seem to realize the effects of his ever-increasing minimum flight shifts on his soldiers, but he is somehow the face of leadership and control in the camp. Milo cannot see past his greed for profit and even encourages unorthodox prostitution, but he is one of the most well-respected men in the war by word of mouth. Others like the chaplain and Major continually see the problems of war, but instead of working to destroy the corruption, they often physically distance themselves from men like Cathcart and avoid confrontation at all costs.
In A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, Muriel, Sybil, and her mothers are unable to realize the deep wound that war has left on Seymour Glass. They notice only superficial details, like he has been staring at trees and he has just not been the same, but these people do not realize the implications that come with these details, although they sure can talk. Muriel is seen chatting with her mother instead of spending time with her depressed partner, and Sybil talks of a storm with her own mother, who immediately leaves her young daughter alone on a beach, and Seymour Glass, who has been mysteriously quiet. On the other hand, Seymour Glass's efficient eyes, he can see what the war can do and has done to him. His explanation of his own internal turmoil to Sybil offers insight into his omniscience, introvertedness, and hopelessness, all of which forces his hand in the end.
In For Esme with Love and Squalor, Clay cannot understand the cause of the narrator's internal strife since he himself has not been affected by the war. He barges in, noisily disrupting the narrator, and grumbles, wondering why the narrator insists on sitting alone instead of enjoying the company of other soldiers. The narrator, however, is too deeply involved in his own feelings to respond thoughtfully. He is busy pondering notes in a book, and he absent-mindedly and illegibly discusses the concept of hell on the cover. He is lost in his own understanding of murder and death. A gift from Esme, a bright, energetic girl whom the narrator met while sitting lonesomely in an empty coffee shop, rescues him from a dark pit of depression. Esme clearly sees the extent of the narrator's loneliness that has resulted from the war.
However, not only does Esme see past the superficiality of war, especially the intelligence program, she uses her voice to strongly oppose its influence by spreading compassion and sympathy to the hurting soldier sitting quietly and alone. Similarly, Yossarian develops both efficient eyes and mouth by the end of the book, and follows Orr to authenticity by escaping the war zone. But he also encourages others like Milo to do the same. Such abnormal characters embody the ideal traits of a protagonist, one that is apt at both seeing the true effects of war and denying its power over humanity. However, in Banana Fish, Seymour Glass never develops an efficient mouth, and his life ends incompletely and without hope. Unlike the other two anomalous characters, Glass leaves no legacy to end the corruptions of war.
A similar factor between the three literary works is the usage of children, similarly used as a throwaway line. However, their usage is much more significant after analysis. The three children apparent in each story are Nately's Whore's kid sister in Catch-22, Esme in For Esme with Love and Squalor, and Sybil in A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. Each serve a role in advancing the protagonist to overcome something in his life, which does not necessarily mean towards a positive outcome. Through their interactions with the characters come to realizations that could not be achieved otherwise.
It is shown that children can strongly influence characters to move forward with their lives. In Banana Fish, Sybil is a young innocent girl that provides insight into Seymour Glass through his use of the allegory of the banana fish. Also, Salinger's use of Sybil as a name for the child is particularly similar to a Greek Sybil spelled Sibyl, which is a famous icon originating from the Greek times as opposed to Sybil, the young girl in this story. The Greek Sybil was an oracular woman that had prophetic qualities, and according to Greek writer Heraclitus, she reaches 1,000 years with her voice by the aid of God. In connection with the young child, Sybil states that she sees a banana fish with 6 bananas in its mouth. According to Seymour's allegory, he is the banana fish, which means that Sybil sees him out of the hole in which he is currently lodged, representing a future where he has died, since that this is the only way out of the hole after being stuck in it. The significance of the child is to foreshadow Seymour's movement towards his enlightenment, where he is void of negative emotions sprung from his inability to cope with societal differences.
In For Esme with Love and Squalor, the introverted protagonist suffers from possible social distress, shown by him observing a children's choir and eating at a restaurant alone, where at both he encounters the sophisticated Esme, who makes him feel human by putting his existence into the story as opposed to being a third-party observer, which he appears to be. With her presence comes the illumination of the qualities of Sergeant X, as the narrator is later referred to in the story. During these times, she brings out the good qualities of the narrator, his humor, his social prowess, and his empathetic qualities, of which are presented during his confrontation with Esme's little brother. Afterwards, a new side of the narrator is shown, where he is no longer writing letters, he is in emotional shreds, and has recently just been released from a hospital for ambiguous reasons. He then, after being emotionally torn from his family and friends, such as his brother, whose only concern is bringing bayonets home for the kids, and his sincere friend who simply wants him to get out of the room and enjoy the aspects which life can bring, he finds the package from Esme, which encloses her father's watch and a brief message from her and Charles, her brother. After receiving this package, there is an immediate transition from the sleep-deprived Sergeant X side of the narrator to the narrator at the beginning of the short story, who has hope and a feeling of belonging. Once again, Esme acts as a link to humanity, which pulls him through and enables him to become the compassionate person that he once was. She demonstrates a love that goes beyond material possessions and gives him a hope in humanity to continue despite societal differences with all of his faculties intact.
In Catch-22, the usage of children is quite sparse, except for the one instance of Knightley's whore's kid's sister who was evicted from her apartment by some army officials under the non-existent guidelines of Catch-22. Yossarian feels that he is needed to find this girl and requests from Milo Minderbinder to aid him in finding the girl, emphasizing Yossarian's strong dedication to find her. This girl indirectly illustrates the future path of Yossarian, where he officially realizes the fallacies inside of the Catch-22 and ventures through the darkness in order to find the light, shown by his walk around Rome and finding Arfi, who raped and murdered the maid by throwing her out of the window. His conscience weighs heavily as he tells Arfi what he has done. Contrary to his beliefs, he is once again forsaken by the Catch-22 infested world by being arrested by the police instead of Arfi for being away without leave. Yossarian's awakening started when the kid sister enlightened the fallacies in his life, allowing him to reconstruct himself into a Yossarian who clearly understands his goals, and is able to defy Colonel Cathcart to the end by not accepting his proposition to send him home under the conditions of demonstrating a friendship in order to deteriorate the morale of Yossarian's fellow soldiers.
War is a timeless memento of the trauma put on characters in the stories. They are reminded that they are still part of a complex society, regardless of what they have gone through. Similarly, in the fall of Icarus, people continue on regardless of tragic occurrences. The characters are forsaken as products of war without being given meaning to their service. They went to war and went back. It is unbeknownst to people of what occurs in the middle. The emotional trauma of killing those similar to yourself and the sight of the death of comrades. War is much more than a three-letter word. The characters represent a more rich view of war representations, not just the sole aspect of heroes of war. The three stories present an iconic view of the truth of war without all the glorifications that are commonly associated with the soldiers. However, these soldiers' lives must continue, and if the body cannot keep up with the changes, then a downfall occurs, shown by Seymour's untimely death. Children, isolation, romanticization of war, and the idea of efficient eyes are all very central to all three literary works, and they provide insight into the realities of real soldiers. These ideas can be universal in terms of the realities that genuinely affect most people at least once in their lifetime.